So some of my fondest memories as a child with my extended family were being with cousins at my grandma and grandpa's house in Fresno, California, and playing hide and seek. Just kind of a typical kids game, but my grandparents had this great house and great yard with great hiding places. I can picture it now, though they've both long since gone home to be with the Lord. The pantry, the backyard behind the lemon tree, of course I thought those were the best spots. We moved from, hide and seek at grandma's house to seeking, but something, maybe it's just something we lost. We were not playing hide and seek. We wish we didn't lose that thing or misplace that thing, but we're going after it. We're trying to find it. Where'd I put my glasses down? Where'd I put my phone? To even more importantly, seeking for purpose, seeking perhaps a person, if you're single and you're praying that God brings someone into your life, seeking a friend, perhaps even seeking certain pleasures to satisfy us. Remember the C.S. Lewis quote as we kicked off our ministry season, "Don't let your happiness depend on something you may lose." But we're searching, we're seeking, we're on a quest. And this is the heartbeat of our text this morning. Come meet Jesus, always seeking. You're going to see as we unpack this narrative, Jesus is on a quest, and it's different than what the people around him were seeking. Jesus has a mission that is different than the mission that the people want him to have. His mission is to do the will of the Father. They want him to do their will. That doesn't sound so unique to probably even those of us in the churched world. We want Jesus to work on our behalf. You see, but he seeks the Father's heart. And here we're going to see that they seek their own selfish desires. And this plays out in Mark chapter 1, verses 35 to 45 in four clear characteristics of Jesus' seeking. John mentioned the Redeemer Weekly. Through Redeemer Weekly, you can find our sermon outline, our service order to follow along, or as we use slides, that gives you an opportunity as well to follow along. But as we look at these four clear characteristics of Jesus' seeking, let me read the text for us, and then we'll dive right in. Mark chapter 1, beginning in verse 35. "And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him. And they found him and said to him, 'Everyone is looking for you.' And he said to them, 'Let us go to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out.' And he went through all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons." Verse 40, "And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, 'If you will, you can make me clean.' Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, 'I will be clean.' And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once and said to him, 'See that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them.' But he went out and began to talk freely about it, spread the news, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places, and people were coming to him from every quarter." Each of these characteristics of Jesus' seeking, we're going to also note sort of the contrast by way of application of what stands on the other side of the Jesus kind of seeking, and that is the selfish seeking. And I think you're going to find it quite convicting. So listen to the text, get ready for the application, and let's just see what the Spirit of God does in each of our hearts. First, number one, seeking intimacy. Look at verse 35 again. "Rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed." One of the quirky features of my life is that I like to celebrate dead guys. And Jonathan Edwards, one of my dead guy heroes, his birthday was yesterday. And so I, read a little Jonathan Edwards, reflected on his impact in my life. This was a brilliant man. This was a driven man. Some would argue that Jonathan Edwards was the most brilliant mind that America has ever produced. He had a passion for the king. That's what stands out to me above all. He was a theologian above all else. But the thing about Jonathan Edwards that has so impacted me was not his theology, though it's rich and dense and sometimes hard to unpack. It's his piety. It's piety. That's just another word we use for his devotion, his intimacy with Jesus. Can't read Jonathan Edwards without being overwhelmed by the deep, humble, passionate love he had for his Savior. Now, this may sound funny, but here it goes. Listen to this statement. We pursue intimacy with God because God pursued intimacy with God. It's a strange statement. We pursue intimacy with God because God pursued intimacy with God. Here, Jesus, God's Son, God, very God, is longing for intimacy with his Father. He's here on earth. He's about to embark on the mission for which God sent him. And listen, Redeemer, he needed time with God. God needed time with God. The Son needed time with the Father. And this intimacy that the Son pursued with the Father, it didn't seclude him away from real world hurts and ministry. As we're going to see, rather, it is the very fuel that drove him right into ministry with people. Let me just give you one other, maybe we'll call it like a cheat code to understanding this text. And one of these elements of the gospel that can at times be sort of confusing. Jesus would tell people after he had healed them or had done something profound, he would often tell them, as we see in this text, don't go tell anybody. I don't know if you're like me. I don't know how many times I read that. Well, what is that about? I mean, isn't it that Jesus wanted everybody? Aren't we supposed to be witnesses? Why was Jesus telling people at times, be quiet, don't go talk about it? It has everything to do with what Jesus was seeking versus what the people were seeking. Now, we're going to unpack that further, but it has everything to do with the fact that Jesus was seeking one thing and the people were seeking something different. They were already looking. We're not even a full chapter into this. And the people were already looking to make Jesus famous. And you know what Jesus was all about doing? Fleeing the fame. Fleeing the fame and looking to preach, as we've seen, the gospel of the kingdom. They're seeking their own comfort and Jesus as their genie. And Jesus is about seeking intimacy with the Father. Now, they had real world needs, and they were blind to their deeper, greater need. So 2 things that I just would have you consider on this first characteristic of seeking intimacy. The first thing is we see right off the bat rising very early. Now, 1 day had passed. Remember, it was a Sabbath. We saw that last week, verses 21. It was on the Sabbath, and then by the time we get to verse 30, or that 21 down to verse 32, that evening at sundown. All of what we had looked at, 1 day, a Sabbath day. He had preached. He had cast out a demon in the synagogue. He had healed Peter's mother-in-law. And oh yeah, then the whole city brought their sick to him, right? Verse 32, that evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. The word is getting out. Jesus is getting famous. People are flocking to hear him. People are flocking to meet him. People are flocking to be healed by him. And he's exhausted. It was a long day. I mean, this was a sleep-in morning if ever there was one. Like, do you reason with yourself that way? Like, I'll be like, man, I had a really long day last night. I think I'll skip my workout this morning. It went really late, and so I'm going to give myself an extra hour of sleep, right? Now, mind you, I have some kids who, even if they didn't have a long night before, they could still sleep in pretty well. Pretty good, pretty late. This was a long, full, tiring day for Jesus. The kind of day that even the president is pushing off his morning meetings, but not Jesus. It says there in verse 35, rising very early in the morning while it was still dark. While it was still dark. The language is actually at night very much. I mean, it's still dark outside. Oh, dark 30. Right? This is, they've said in the watch, this was between 3 and 6 a.m. Now, closer to 6 a.m. feels a little bit like morning to me. 3 a.m. feels very much night still, right? I remember in college we would have morning prayer meetings sometimes, and there was a friend whose reasoning for not getting up early to pray was that he said, if it's dark outside, I imagine you're just talking to Jesus on his answering machine. He's not awake yet to hear you, right? Because it's very much early. It didn't keep Jesus from getting up. And it says that he departed and went to a desolate place. Now, remember these themes that are emerging as we're going through the Gospel of Mark. When we see that desolate place, it ought to trigger what we saw a few weeks back about Jesus going into the wilderness to be tempted. He was out in the wilderness. And we're to think metaphorically as we read this, because Capernaum, where they are now, was not wilderness. It's a rich agricultural area by the Sea of Galilee. It's littered with little fishing and farming villages. So listen, friends, this is more about the picture of Jesus simply getting away to where he could be alone with the Father, away from the distractions of the world, in his own desolate wilderness place where he was striving for intimacy with the Father. Now, I want to keep going, but to say, you need a place like this where you can get alone with God. It might be a chair in your front room. It might be your favorite coffee shop that opens early. It might be a spot in your backyard or a place you like to go hike, but you need a place. You need your desolate place. You need the place where the distractions don't abound, where you're not like 2 verses in and then you're picking up your phone. This is the aloneness of intimacy with God. What was Jesus doing? Well, it says that he got up early in the morning while it was still dark. He departed and went to a desolate place. And listen, there he prayed. There he prayed. Now listen, this wasn't intercessory prayer for those that he had just met and ministered to. Because there are a lot of people, no doubt, he had seen the day before. He had healed, he had helped, he had preached to. No, this was him seeking the heart of the Father. This has a tone of longing. We see this language 2 other times in the Gospel of Mark. One of the other times we see it was when Jesus was feeding the 5,000, and he had this deep sense of compassion for all of these people that didn't have anything to eat, and he prayed to the Father that he would provide for them. The other time we see it is in the Garden of Gethsemane, right before Jesus is to go to the cross, and he is longing for the Father and to do the will of the Father. Jesus was seeking, listen, inner refreshment for the day ahead. Intimacy. Donald Barnhouse, old commentator, said this pretty powerful little quote. If Jesus, in his great power and oneness with God, could feel the urgent necessity of communion with the Father, how much more you and I need to go to the Father for the strength that fills our weakness and the knowledge that fills our ignorance. Prayer brings us into a fellowship with God that nothing else can provide. So let me just make the application contrast as we see the seeking that Jesus did and the seeking that you and I often are prone to do, or that we see later in the text. And it's this. It's seeking intimacy versus staying shallow. I don't know a man or a woman that walks with God, that is the kind of person that I want to live my life like, that I can just see maturity oozing from them, that doesn't have a strong devotional life, that doesn't find daily place to go, to be in the Word, to be in prayer, to deepen their soul, to be mature, to grow in maturity. And I'll just say it. Without it, you remain shallow. Without it, you stay on the surface. And it's one of those things that honestly grieves me for what can be true of my own life, if I'm not careful, of those that could be in church for a really long time, where they've heard a lot of information, but there's no personal, devotional seeking of intimacy with the Father. And they just stay sort of this deep, scratching the surface. And I'll just tell you, friends, if you want maturity, you want growth, you want intimacy with God, start somewhere. Get up 15 minutes earlier, get a Bible reading plan, start a prayer journal, grab a devotional. Let that time fuel your intimacy with the Father. This was what Jesus did. If Jesus did it, how much more do we need it, right? Secondly, seeking focus. And now in the text, we begin to see the kind of seeking that the people are doing around Jesus. First, the four men who Jesus called to follow him: Simon Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And it shows Simon Peter taking the lead. Verse 36, and Simon and those who were with him searched for him. And so there's this search party that gets sent out. It's been a long day. People are clamoring for Jesus. They're like, come on, we got a big day ahead, Jesus. You're going to get even more famous. They send out a search party looking for him. And when they find him, which again just goes to show he wasn't hiding, he was just getting alone. He just needed time alone with the Father. They sort of give him a what for. They give him sort of this sassy rebuke. Look at verse 37. And they found him and said to him, everyone's looking for you. Like, Jesus, what are you doing out here? And you could just, I don't know that Jesus would respond sarcastically like I would, but he's probably going like, well, yeah, I know. Why do you think I got up early to get some time by myself? Because I knew you guys were going to start doing this. And you wanted more, and the people wanted more of a selfish seeking, and I needed something different. It's like they're saying, what are you doing? What are you doing spending time in prayer, Jesus? Don't you know there's a lot of ministry to be done? This betrays a lot of how we think wrongly about what we need, right? What are you doing spending an hour in prayer when you got so much that's calling your name at the office? What are you doing taking time to be in the Word when you got 100 emails that are waiting for you? What are you doing getting alone, finding some quiet, and building a devotional life when you know there's chores and kids and laundry and dishes? I love the example of Susanna Wesley, the mother of John and Charles Wesley. Susanna Wesley was a woman of piety, of devotion. And you can just imagine this, moms, and you're in the crazy of the day starting, and the kids are pulling at you, and you got this chore and that chore. And Susanna Wesley made it a habit of sometimes just in the middle of the kitchen, and she would take her apron and she would put it over her head. And her kids came to understand that was mom needing a little bit of time. A little bit of time to pray. A little bit of time to have her heart focused. A little bit of time free from distraction. And it modeled to her kids this very thing we're talking about. Intimacy, focus. In seeking the Lord, friends, there is focus. I have come to not feel like it's distracting to make notes while I'm having time with the Lord, but actually I find that when I'm in prayer and when I'm in the Word is when I get some of the most creative thoughts and ideas of reaching out to people or doing things, and I'll just write them down because there's a focus to what I'm to be about when I'm alone with the Lord. There's purpose, there's priority. And this was true even of Jesus. It provides him, as we will see, a mission redirect. He says, listen, disciples, everyone may be looking for me, but I am looking to the Father to have my heart rightly aligned to his. Do you do what everyone else is expecting you to do? Do you do what everyone else is demanding that you do? Or do you make sure that you are focused on that which the Father has called you to do? Making sure, as even Jesus himself was quick to make sure that he didn't let fame get in the way of what the Father had called him to. I'd like to think that he must have reflected with his Father in prayer on the previous day. The previous day of healings, the previous day of teaching, the previous day of casting out demons. And in his reflecting with the Father, he had reaffirmed the very purpose for which he'd come to earth. You see, Jesus refused to embark on a ministry that was merely being a miracle worker. That's what we're to see that Jesus saw as his focus. So like, people want something from me, and it's making me really popular, but it's not what the Father's called me to. And it was in prayer that he got a sense of that focus and the redirect. Perhaps he saw how quickly a good thing, a right thing can evolve into a distraction. Ever had that happen to you? You're doing a lot of good things. Before you know it, that good thing that isn't the main thing has distracted you from the main thing, from the best thing. Jesus says, I bring the authority to heal. That is a mark of my godness. But that is not what I primarily want people to see and hear. And so he redirects the agenda for the day. Look at verses 38 and 39. They find him, and he says to them, let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came. And he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. Now watch, he's still committed to the same things. He's still preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons, but he's moving on to other places. Taylor Swift. How many LA shows did Taylor Swift have? Kate, how many LA shows did Taylor Swift have? Three LA shows? She probably could have had more LA shows, I'm guessing. Right? She could have stayed in one place and just more and more people coming, paying thousands of dollars ridiculously to come watch her perform. This is what Jesus could have done. He had everyone coming to him here in Capernaum. He could have just stayed there and gotten more and more popular, more and more famous, but the focus of his ministry would not allow it. So as we see this contrast in seeking focus, it's either we're about seeking focus or getting distracted. It's so easy to get distracted, isn't it? So easy to get distracted by good things. And before you know it, a church is doing good things, but not the main things. You, me, our families. We're doing good things. We're doing things that people are patting us on the back for, that's making us maybe find greater success, popularity. It's not the main thing. Distractions. Squirrel. Right? Sports. Shopping. Work. Sometimes just even the encouragement of ministry successes. Seeking focus or getting distracted. May we be people that seek focus. Number 3, we see in this account the kind of seeking that Jesus did was seeking compassion. And now we meet a man whose experience here with Jesus illustrates the very difference between seeking the will of the Father and being self-seeking, and how subtle it can be. And so let's meet this self-seeking leper. Verse 40, and a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, if you will, you can make me clean. And if you're like me, after the first reading of the text, I'm saying, what's so self-seeking about this man? What's so self-seeking about this leper? He comes to Jesus with a real need. He implores him. He kneels before him. And he affirms what he has heard and maybe even seen about Jesus' authority over physical suffering. You healed Peter's mother-in-law. You can heal me. What's so wrong with what this man is doing? Well, you're going to have to wait until we see the whole of this account. But we can start by saying, yes, he has a real need. And he's described as a leper, a man with leprosy, a skin disease that causes isolation. Leviticus describes in, frankly, too much detail and too much grotesque describing of sores and open wounds for me, the disgusting nature of this disease and the way in which lepers were treated so as to not have it spread to the whole community. They were isolated. This man, listen, this man was not only experiencing the debilitating effects of a chronic disease, but listen, he was experiencing the mental anguish of having been removed from his community. He was experiencing physically, emotionally, mentally what it was to be isolated, to be dying. And even if, as we will see, this man's seeking of Jesus looks only genuine from the outside, listen, Jesus is still moved by it. Look at verse 41. Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, I will be clean. He was moved with indignation. I call this the angry heart of compassion. The text literally reads, moved with indignation. Now, our translators, because that's sort of confusing, have changed it to pity or compassion. What does it mean to be moved with indignation? This is a heart of anger. Listen, this is anger towards the broken world that robs men of health and wholeness. This is the anger of Jesus that fuels the compassion of Jesus. Remember his early morning prayer time? And he's redirected the day's events to focus on preaching the kingdom. We need to not stay here. We need to keep moving. We need to go on to other places. But here he comes across this leper, and he's moved with mercy for this man. His physical suffering, his relational isolation. I want you to think with me a moment about this. Compassion that isn't fueled by anger ends in, listen, merely good deeding, which leads to self-righteousness. Now, I'm not giving you men particularly, I'm not giving you a justification to get angry all the time. I'm saying that the difference between a worldly compassion and a godly compassion is anger that says, I know the nature of sin. I'm not just trying to do a deed of kindness. I know that this hurting person is trapped in sin, and there is only one answer, and it is the Redeemer. So I could do nice, kind things to this person, which people would view as pity, mercy, compassion. But if it's not fueled by, look, the enemy is out to get this person, and that makes me really angry. There is an enemy that opposes God's kingdom. And I'm angry that that enemy in this fallen world is hurting people. We want to help people. We want to be a church of compassion and mercy and pity. But not just because, oh, those poor people. No, because we know the devastating effects that sin can have. We know there's a very real conflict. And so we're fueled by a righteous anger, by a hatred for sin that moves us into action. Jesus does one other noteworthy thing here. Look at verse 41, 42. Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, and look at it, and touched him and said to him, I will be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. Now Jesus knew the Old Testament law, and he knew that in touching this leper, it would make him ceremonially unclean. Jesus knew that in touching this man, he would be viewed by the people, by the priests, by the Jewish hierarchy as one who did something against the law, and yet he was moved with anger that fueled compassion for this man, and he knew that in touching him, he could bring healing to him. This is powerful. It's a powerful picture. He was willing to be, listen, he was willing to be seen as unclean to make this man whole. Now, we're going to come back to that as we come to the Lord's table, because that's exactly what Jesus did for you and I. But let's just look at the application and the contrast here. It's either seeking compassion or being bothered. I wish it weren't the case that all too often when I see people hurting, struggling, or in need, I'm just bothered. I'm not moved with the kind of deep compassion that Jesus had here, knowing the nature of sin, knowing the nature of the enemy, knowing the wreckage and the carnage that's going to happen in this person's life. And I'm just bothered. Jesus was moved by compassion. Finally, lastly, the whole story comes into focus as Jesus' early morning prayer meeting with the Father now clarifies what he is really all about. He is seeking followers. He's seeking intimacy, he's seeking focus, he's seeking compassion, and really the heart of the matter is that he is seeking followers. Look at verse 43 and 44. And Jesus sternly charged him, the leper, who was now cleansed, and sent him away at once, and said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them. Jesus must have known the heart of this man, and he must have known that this man was seeking a healing and not the healer. And so he tells him, tell nobody. Go fulfill what the law requires. What was meant by this? Well, it would expose really what was in this man's heart. And it would be a witness to the Jews that the healer had come. The law prescribed first, if a leper had been made whole, that a priest would come to the home before he was allowed to go to the temple, and in his own examination, see that this man had no longer leprosy. Then that man was to go to the Jewish temple in Jerusalem and be pronounced clean by the priest. And then he would offer sacrifices there at the temple for his restoration to the community. See here, Jesus is not against the law. He actually came to fulfill the law. And in directing this man to do this very thing, he wanted those who still lived by the law to see that someone greater had actually come. And the priest would go, wow, it isn't just a healing, this is about the healer. Of course, we see that this man is not interested in obeying either the law, because he doesn't go do this, or obeying Jesus, who told him to be quiet. And this man just wants to live his life now that he has one again, right? He's like, I got healed. I'm going to go live my life. I'm going to go do all those things I'd never thought I'd get to do because I was alone and isolated and dying. And he is the, we saw the rebuke of Jesus, and he is the loose-lipped leper, I call him. He's the loose-lipped leper. His heart's exposed. His selfish seeking is made obvious. And in doing so, this man, he puts up obstacles, not only to his own obedience, but to the ministry of Jesus. Look at verse 45. The man went out and began to talk freely about it, spread the news so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town. but was out in desolate places. People were coming to him from every quarter. So here Jesus, he redirects the ministry from Capernaum to these other villages. He heals this man along the way. This man doesn't obey what Jesus said. He's talking about him. And so now the people know where Jesus is, and they make it even harder now for Jesus to enter into these villages and preach the gospel of the kingdom. And Jesus goes out again to now desolate places, to the wilderness, where people, as is always the case, have to leave their homes, and they have to go seeking Jesus. It's one thing to be a fan. It's another thing to be a follower. See, Jesus wasn't interested in just building a big fan base. And this is the reason why Jesus told people at times, don't go say anything. Keep quiet. Don't do that. Why? Because Jesus wasn't interested in just becoming famous. That wasn't the reason for which he came. He was interested in preaching the kingdom such that people would repent and believe. He wants followers. He wants people of faith, not fans. And so here in this final contrast, the whole of this narrative, Mark 1:35-45, is brought to bear on our hearts. On our hearts. On the hearts of those who John Mark wrote this gospel to, who were suffering in Rome under Nero, remember? And it's this: seeking followers versus remaining a fan. Jesus says to every one of us this morning, you can say a fan, but that's not what I came for. I'm seeking followers. Sinclair Ferguson says this, hopeful: how sad it is to record that this man whom Jesus had so wonderfully helped and restored actually became an obstacle to Jesus. His life underlines a basic lesson of discipleship. The Lord's work should be done only in the Lord's way, according to the Lord's word. Lord's work, Lord's way, Lord's word. Want to be a disciple? Means you're a follower. Want to be seeking Jesus the way he's called you to seek him? It means there's going to be intimacy, focus, compassion. You're going to lay down your life. He doesn't want you saying, hey, going to church is fun. Follow Jesus, everything will work out. That's not what he's interested in. He's interested in this basic truth of discipleship. Lord's work, done in the Lord's way, according to the Lord's word. So it's Communion Sunday, and we're going to sing now, and we're going to respond to what Christ has called us to. And then we're going to pray, and then we're going to celebrate the Lord's table, and then we're going to have lunch together in this beautiful flow of what the Redeemer has done for us. And as Seth and Paige come back up front, I want to leave us with this one thought as we come to a time of congregational singing. Jesus was willing to become what you are so that you may share in what he is. Jesus was willing to become what you are, a sinner, unclean, leper, so that you might share in what he is, righteous. Of course, this is captured in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. For our sake, God made him, Jesus, sin, to be sin, who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. We're the leper. We're the leper. He said, I'll touch you and you'll be clean, even if it means I'm viewed as unclean, so that you might share in my righteousness. And that's what we celebrate when we come to the Lord's table. So let me pray for us. We'll sing a few songs and reflect on this very truth. God, I'm the leper, so deeply in need of the touch, even this morning, of your Son, Jesus. Father, I'm the unclean one, and your Son, the clean one. And in this great act of reversals, I am healed and cleansed by the blood of the Lamb. I am restored, body, soul, mind, to relationship with you. I'm restored to a community of believers. I'm no longer in isolation. And so we reflect on this truth, Jesus. As we come to the table in a few minutes, may our hearts be moved by the fact that we couldn't save ourselves. We couldn't save ourselves, and your Son did it all. In Christ's name I pray.